Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse. We at the Warehouse Podcast have been away for so long, and it's our bad, honestly. We are really messing up over here at the Warehouse Podcast. So I am trying to correct that, get me and our team back on track. In all seriousness, though, we've just really, I think it's probably fair to say we all have a lot going on all the time. And in particular, we've had a lot going on. So in any case, yeah, really sorry to all the people who have been waiting desperately for this episode to come out and have wanted to hear us talk about the emergence of our all-star behind the plate in Samuel Basayo and talk about what is wrong with Trevor Rogers on the mound. And at one point, I was contemplating an episode on what was wrong with Kobe Mayo, which I didn't get a chance to do, even though he has now seemed a bit, at least, to turn that around. He is hitting and playing very differently than he used to be, even though, the defense is still some concerns, but in any case. Um, so yeah, basically, I know and I'm well aware that there is so much happening with this team right now that deserves a lot of deep introspection and interrogation, and that unfortunately is not going to be what's going to happen on this episode. This is the episode that, hey, we have not recorded a podcast in a few weeks, and this is where the team is at. And I'm going to try to not really recount what has happened over the last 3 weeks, but just talk about where we are sort of at. Uh, the month of May just ended, which around this time period is sort of a benchmark that GMs and organizations, team executives, etc., look at to sort of assess. It's sort of an early in the year assessment of where different teams are at based upon their performance. We've crossed a quarter of the way through the year. We have not reached a third yet, but we will be there in a blink of an eye. And yeah, so I just kind of want to zoom out a little bit. We entered June today. The Orioles had an off day on June 1st. They head to Boston to take on the Red Sox, and they're going to start that series on tomorrow, which is the day this episode. I am expecting this episode to come out. So, yeah, basically, there's a lot going on. There are a lot of details that I am not going to get into. I am just going to kind of give a broad overall assessment of where this team, where this organization is at, what really needs to happen in order to improve, and just kind of go through a little bit about what recent improvements have been from this team in the last 10 days, which I'm going to kind of highlight here right now. So, where are we at? Where is everything? Just how are the Orioles doing just in general? So, to start, the Orioles are 4 games under 500 at the time of this recording. They are 28 and 32. For reference, at this point in the season last year, the Orioles were a dismal 22 and 36. Um, as of now, the Orioles are 10 games out of first place because of the red hot Rays, basically. Although, as Oriole fans listening probably know, the Orioles did and were able to sweep them when they came to Baltimore. Uh, Pretty wild win on Memorial Day. That the Orioles demonstrated tremendous resilience. The Rays probably should have put the game away a couple times, but the Orioles were very, very resilient, as were, in all seriousness, the Rays, kind of coming back after letting a lead slip and retaking the lead over and over. But the Orioles were the victors in the game. and then went on, took that momentum from game one of that series and won the next two games, the last one being in pretty convincing fashion. So the Orioles had been swept when they went to Tampa. They got a little bit of revenge by sweeping the Rays when they entered Baltimore. But even still, this 10 games back is maybe slightly better than it could have been if the Rays had perhaps won the game on Memorial Day or one, two, or three. This 10 games back, the Rays could look even worse. Now, um, I think it's very possible. The Rays are very good this year, it seems. I'm not, I think and pay more attention to the Orioles. But the Rays always have a good organization. They are never horrendous, basically. At their worst, they're normally like a 500 team in that ballpark. And, the Rays are, despite issues I have with how they kind of do things, in terms of, basically not paying players. Another topic that, we are going to have to talk about on this show at some point in the near future, given negotiations for the new collective bargaining agreement coming up. But basically, so I don't like the Rays, and then, they are just, sort of brutal with, how they get rid of guys who have been around for a long time. As a fan, as a Rays fan, you can't get attached to any player because they will surely trade them away for, perhaps a few prospects and maybe some good players eventually. But, you definitely can't get too attached. So, in all that to say, they are a pretty effective organization, despite, some grievances I would have with them. But with that said, it is very possible, and it might look like the Rays are just going to sort of run away with the division so far this year. Early on, the Yankees are really the only team that is semi close to them in the American League East. The Yankees are, not even semi close. They're a game and a half back. The Blue Jays are 9 games back, and as I said, the Orioles sit 10 games back. So if we're looking at the division, I mean, I think, I'm not going to say entirely it's too early to count us out of that. But what I would think is that this division would have to shape up to be a lot weaker than we expected it to be at the beginning of this year. And that would mean the first place team would have to be a lot weaker than what we expect or expected them to be at the beginning of this year. Um, if this division ends with the top team winning 92 games or 91 games, perhaps you could make a case that the Orioles are in contention for that. It would require them, one, getting back to 500, which they've struggled to do, but then also really turning on the burners and getting hot for a period of time, perhaps an extended period of time over the course of a month or two, playing really good baseball to be able to do that, to overcome this 4 game under 500 deficit. All that to say, I think their chances are very, very low, but I'm not going to totally dismiss the possibility of the Orioles winning the division. I think, teams have blown being up 7 games in the standings with in the final month of the season. So I'm not going to totally rule them out for that, but I do think, in all practicality, the Orioles are going to be looking for a wild card berth to enter the playoffs. If we kind of hang around this mark by the trade deadline, etc. Of course, there is the possibility the Orioles fall off and by the trade deadline are out of it. That is a real possibility that I think the organization has to grapple with and come to potential terms with, and then figure out how they're going to make their moves at the deadline. It's also very possible that this team is lingering right around 500, maybe a couple games below 500, and, are then looking at the deadline and trying to kind of make that push. In addition to the record distinction for the Orioles between this year and last year, the other thing that is really being talked about throughout the throughout baseball, I think, really, is the mediocrity of the American League. And as I said before, the O's are only one game out of the division. I'm sorry, of the wild card, of the final wild card spot. So there are two spots that are further out of reach at the top of the wild card race. But the Blue Jays at 29 and 31 are only who have the third and final wild card spot, are only a game ahead of the Orioles at 28 and 32. The Orioles heavily benefited by being able to split that series at home against the Blue Jays, which it did not look like at a certain moment in time that that's where that was headed until the Jeff Hoffman collapse and breakdown in game 3 of that series. But basically, everybody has sort of been talking about the mediocrity of the American League this year, and it is a valid talking point, and something to consider. I don't think that, I think the thing that people have to keep in mind, in general, is that I highly doubt. I mean, it is possible the number is lower by the end of the year than normal, required to make the playoffs. But it really only takes these other teams kind of keeping pace with where they're at, and one of these teams getting hotter, right, to and starting to crush the other mediocre ends of the league, or the worst part of the league, beat up on the Royals, beat up on the Tigers, the Angels, definitely. Um, in order for the standings to sort of look different by the end of the season. So, although the mediocrity of the American League East has kept the Orioles in contention right now, so far this year, I don't want anyone to get confused and think that the Orioles or any other team in the American League can make the playoffs by just a by winning 82 games this year, or 80 games this year, or having a record at or near 500. At a bare minimum, it'll probably still require 85 wins, or something around there, 86, 87, something. And that is probably best case scenario. I don't know. I'm sure 84, 82, I'm sure even, 79 is mathematically possible. But it's not going to happen realistically. The 79 at least, maybe 84 could happen. But yeah, so I do just want to kind of keep that in mind, and kind of projecting out, toward the end of the season. There's no sort of world where the Orioles can kind of have a record like this paced out over the full 162 game season where they are going to be making the playoffs. They have to change their record and play better as a result. Fortunately, if you're an Orioles fan, for the last 10 games, the Orioles have been doing exactly that. They had a homestand, where a 10-game homestand where they went 7-3 over the last 10 games. Um, Prior to that, in the month of May, the Orioles were 6-13, which in the month of May, the Orioles played in total, if you combine those two, played to a 13-16 record in the entire month of May. Not very good. But if you take into account that May was really the month that crushed the Orioles, last year and really, really put them out of contention. As I said, the Orioles were 22 and 36, 14 games under 500 last year at this point. The Orioles are only four under 500, so such a significant improvement from that. May was really the month that I think a lot of people had concerns about heading into it. I know that we on our podcast, Eli, I think, was the one that kind of mentioned how the Orioles need to not collapse at the beginning of the season. That was kind of um his big thing, right? Was that like they have to not repeat what they did last year and not dig themselves too much of a hole. And at the beginning of the month, when the O's had gone 6 and 13, it looked like they might be on the path to doing exactly that and burying themselves and taking themselves out of contention before the season really even got to, um, before we even got into feeling like it's Major League Baseball season and we're sort of in the routine of it, the Orioles already find themselves out of contention. That would have been a really, really big disaster for this team. And fortunately, this impending crisis that I think a lot of people were very, very concerned about happening did not end up happening. Kind of as I said, the Orioles were able to, beat the Tigers 2 out of 3 in very unconvincing fashion. I will say at the time, it did not look great. Yeah, in so many ways, it did not look great. If Kenley Jansen kind of shuts the game down, as he was expecting to, of course, but if that had happened, the Orioles would have not won that series, but that's not how things turned out. And then they did go on to beat the very good Rays. Um, so yeah, I think the one important thing to say is crisis averted from that perspective, right? The Orioles are alive at the end of the month of May, right? The Orioles have a heartbeat. The Orioles are within the conversation for long term for a playoff spot. And they have not ended the season before it started, which is, given what happened last year, a very, very big improvement. Um, Now, I do want to talk a little bit about what the last 10 games have been like for the Orioles that have sort of led to the success. And I'm gonna keep it very, like I said, I'm not gonna go into a lot of details here. But a couple of the big things is one, the pitching, and in particular, the starting rotation has looked like it has taken a bit of a corner. The only exception to that potentially is Trevor Rogers. Now, I think, as many people are aware at this point, the Orioles in Game 2 of their series against Toronto, Trevor Rogers had looked like he was moving through the game with such ease. He had pitched 6 innings, was in the 70 pitch range. So he had pitched six really, really good innings before just absolutely collapsing in the seventh inning, giving up two consecutive 2-run home. Well, I guess it's not quite consecutive. I guess you can't hit a 2-run home run and then another 2-run home run immediately after. But basically, I think you all get what I'm trying to say. The Blue Jays did exactly that. They got a guy on base, hit a 2-run home run. Albernaz not sensing the danger, which was somewhat baffling having watched the game. Um, Allowed Rogers to try to work himself out of the jam, out of the issues. And with a 5-2 lead, with a 5-0 lead, Rogers gives up two 2-run home runs to make it 5-4. The Orioles end up going on to lose the game with Yenier Cano. Um, so, and that is one example. Bassett at the very beginning of this 10 game stretch had a not great start following Keegan Aiken as the opener. But in general, I can nitpick here, but in general, the starting pitching has been a lot different than it was at the beginning of the season, which has led to some of the success for this team so far over the last 10 days. I think that in particular, Kyle Bradish is worth pointing out for that. In addition to Shane Baz, both of them in their last few starts have looked different and looked like different pitchers than they were at the beginning of the season. There is a significant amount of, the Orioles have a significant is maybe overdoing it. The Orioles do have some depth. So I will say I don't think that this is, even though Trevor Rogers would be great to have to sort of return to the form he was in last year, or even just be a competent major league pitcher. If he were just able to do that, I think that the Orioles rotation is deep enough to sort of compensate. Dean Kramer should be coming back at some point in the near future. Brandon Young has looked really good so far with his pitching, with his starts. And we also have Trey Gibson, who has had a couple good starts for his first two major league starts. And of course, we still have Cade Povich as well available. So, um, the Orioles do sort of have the depth, I think, to compensate for Trevor Rogers maybe not doing very good or not being that good throughout the course of this year, or even, I don't know what the Orioles are going to do, but put him in the pen, or if it really, really gets bad, the Orioles might have to try to find another solution, especially with the pressures to win. Um, but I don't think we're at that conversation yet. I'm just kind of saying all that to say, I don't think the Orioles need Trevor Rogers in order to have a successful season or to do well. I do think if Trevor Rogers is not a very good pitcher this year, I do think that does put more pressure on Bradish and Boz to be legitimate number one and number twos in the rotation, to be a legitimate number one and number two in the rotation. But I don't think that that's impossible. I don't think that definitely won't happen. I think that is a possibility of happening. And I think there is a pathway to the Orioles still maintaining a pretty solid rotation, even if Trevor Rogers is not a part of it or not a big or instrumental part of it, and not being the number two or number three that we were kind of hoping or expecting, probably more hoping than expecting, to be honest, him to be this year. So, um, yeah, so I do think definitely in the last 10 games, though, you've seen a significant improvement in the starting rotation, which has led to, um, you know, has been part of the recipe of this 7-3 homestand that the Orioles experienced. Um, the other thing that I think is worth pointing out too is the offense. The offense now, the offense has done a lot better. It's definitely taken a step up from where it's been in the first part of the season prior to these last 10 games. Now there's still guys that are scuffling, um, Gunnar Henderson being one of them. But in general, the offense is doing much, much better than it has been over the last, um, you know, over the over this 10 game homestand. In the last 15 games, the Orioles have a 772 OPS, which is ninth in Major League Baseball. So they've done better. That's kind of middle of the pack, ninth in Major League Baseball, or it's in the middle third, I guess is maybe a better way to say it. But not quite, but it's in the top third technically. But also, it's kind of in the middle-ish. Anyway, yeah, it's ninth out of 30, okay? Um, so yeah, basically, you know, they have had a bit of improvement offensively. Some of that is the only caveat that I would say to this is that I think I still do have some concerns about the offense. Now, I will kind of state that, my bold prediction prior to the season was that the Orioles would have 30 guys, would have four guys that hit 30 home runs. Um, they will probably I'd have to think about that a lot more. Would they have 30 guys that hit four home runs? No, probably not. But in any case, um, my bold prediction going into the season was that the Orioles would have four guys hit 30 home runs. Doesn't look like that is going to happen. Um, but uh, you know, there is a lot of venom in this offense if it can get itself together and can get going. I think that even though there has been improvements with the offense, I am still highly concerned about the inconsistency in this offense. There are a lot of times where the Orioles are facing mediocre pitchers and end up uh, basically being blanked. Um, I think Littell for the Nationals is one guy I'm thinking of that really gave the Orioles a lot of problems offensively, and he's among the worst pitchers in baseball. So, although this offense, and granted, that was before this homestand happened, so just being upfront about that, but or not. Not that I'm trying to deceive you, but trying to be as clear as possible about that. But as far as this homestand goes, you still see a little bit of the inconsistency. The Orioles, kind of as I referenced, were able to have this 7-3 record, assuming everything still works out the same and goes the same. The Orioles were able to have this 7-3 record. Getting comeback wins off of Kenley Jansen, um, for the Tigers. And then this walk off. I mean, they had a walk off on Memorial Day against the Rays with Kowser, but then also this Jeff Hoffman meltdown. So, in the Kenley Jansen game, for example, they were facing the Tigers. Granted, their starting pitcher was not that bad that day, but the offense did nothing for 8 innings and then sort of came alive in the ninth, and it sort of felt like that has been a theme for this offense throughout the year. There has been a lot of extended periods of really, really bad offensive performances, and then some shocking offensive performances. The Orioles did have a game against Tampa where they scored 11 runs, so it's not always true. Sometimes, I'm not saying they never put a complete game offensively together, but there is enough inconsistency that is concerning and a concerning component of this team. In addition to the strikeouts that the Orioles suffer as an offense, um, there's a lot of trouble with situational hitting, perhaps a real over reliance on the home run that is coming up. And I think a lot of these different forces that I'm mentioning are interconnected, interrelated. You're going to have inconsistent offensive performances if you're not hitting well situationally. If you're leaving the bases loaded, that is going to be, with no outs. That is going to be a very, very frustrating and demoralizing offensive experience. I don't think there are a lot of teams that will, leave the bases loaded, one inning, and then come back out the next inning and score 6 runs. Like, I don't think that happens often. Granted, I don't have the stats to support that, but um, yeah, but that's just kind of how I'm thinking. And, you've seen at times the Orioles sort of blow early opportunities to score, and then the offense kind of went to sleep for the rest of the game and was not competitive. So, despite some real positives like Sam Basayo that I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, Taylor Ward, although in a very different way than what we were expecting. Pete Alonso increasingly every day, Adley a bit, so there are bright spots on this offense, but it is concerning that they have not found a way to become and stay and be more consistent as an offense. Um, just kind of going throughout this entire season. And even in the last ten games, there were still problems with offensive consistency. And I just do want to be clear when I say offensive consistency, I'm not saying that, you don't get shut down by Tariq Skubal, or I'm saying that, when we're looking at this offense on paper, when we're looking at the starting pitcher on paper, and we expect X offensive performance, um, and based on the combination of the Orioles hitters on paper and the pitcher on paper, and we are getting below that or beneath that on a pretty regular basis, except for maybe one inning, where we are overcompensating perhaps, or something to that effect. I think that's really where the cause for concern is. And, this team needs to find a way to find some balance offensively, find a way to be better with runners in scoring position, situational hitting, manufacturing runs, things like that. A lot can be done. And, we always sort of, ever since the Orioles had some real offensive outbursts that we've seen, um, we know that this has been a team historically that has relied on the long ball. Sometimes during their times of success, they were a team that would smash home runs or mash home runs. Um, so we've seen that, but the Orioles aren't really hitting home runs sort of in that sort of way. And they're not getting anything else really, or they're not getting enough besides the home runs to really make this a sufficient template. So the Orioles, there's something that has to change offensively to make this team more consistent, and to make it more durable, consistent, and steady, throughout the course of the regular season. Um, with that said, the offense has been better. So I think that that is another really big thing that has come up. Over the last 10 games, I don't. Um, hmm. The other plague that I think I do need to mention here, that has been less of a plague over the last 10 games as well, is the Orioles defense. And this Orioles defense to start this season was an absolute mess. It was a disaster um, all over the field. The outfield was bad. The infield was bad. Gunnar Henderson was bad defensively. Um, and Kobe Mayo was very bad defensively. Um, and not to just highlight them, there were, like I said, there were problems all over the field except for catcher, I would say. Um, and first base. Pete Alonso is doing pretty well over there. There's one glaring exception, to that I'm thinking of, where he made a really, really bad mistake, probably trying to do a little too much. But, this play where he let the ball drop to try to get the out at second kind of thing. So that's what I'm thinking of. But in general, Pete Alonso's been good. But in general, this team has had problems all over the diamond with defense. It's been less of a problem over the last 10 games. Hopefully it stays that way. The Orioles absolutely need to pick it up defensively. I talked about the caution that I had about the Orioles outfield defense. This has been throughout this year, if I'm looking at it in its totality, a step below that general expectation. Or, I was saying that it would be a good season if it was a league average defense. The outfield defense was atrocious to start the year. Um, Not to single them out, like I said, but they were. Um, Over the last 10 games, it has been a bit better. I think it's been less noticeable, the defense, which for this team is a good thing. Um, they're going into for this season, if you're looking at this season, of course, there were a lot of physical errors. There are errors that get marked as errors in the book. There are also other errors that are not getting marked as errors in the book, basically, and are not sort of counting against the stats, right? And are not reflected in the stats. Ground balls that should have been double plays that were bobbled, where just one out was gotten, and things like this, where, um, it is an error. It's absolutely an error or a mistake or a defensive miscue or mistake, but it's not going down as an error in the rule book, or in the scorebook. So I think that that is something that I think everybody, Albernaz probably included, would agree that that was just at such a horrendous level. And the Orioles cannot play defense like they were at the beginning of the season throughout the course of this year and expect to win. There's no possibility, there's no room, there's no way for that to happen. They have to be a competent defense. I'm not saying they have to be amazing or stellar, but they have to be competent. They cannot be giving teams extra outs, extra runs, extra outs that translate to runs, etc., and expect to win and have sustained success over the course of 162 games. It's not possible. I think it's a big challenge for Albernaz and the organization to try to fix and to try to figure out. But with that said, the defense has been a little less noticeable. Hopefully, there's going to be more prioritization of the defense going forward, and trying to ensure and sort of loosen up some loose ends of this defense that have been apparent and have really been costing the Orioles a lot to start the season. Um, I think that there is probably at this point some emphasis or on that for the organization. So I'm hoping that that actually translates to results on the field, and we see significant improvements with the overall defense for this team. Um, so yeah, that is a very, very sort of brief overview. I didn't really talk about the bullpen. The bullpen has been somewhat steady, hasn't been any collapses. Maybe there are a couple guys you could look at that maybe there's some concerns about them getting exposed. But in general, the analysis of the bullpen, I don't think has changed that much recently throughout the course of the year. The bullpen has been the biggest surprise for this team this year. I think the biggest pleasant surprise, and most other facets of the game for the Orioles have been surprises, perhaps, but disappointments. So the offense, I'm sorry, the bullpen has really been throughout the course of the year um, the most steady, solid component of this team. If we're breaking it down and slicing and dicing it into different sections. So, yeah, so not a lot to say right now about the bullpen, but definitely, from a zoomed out view, I think they're not many significant concerns. Rico Garcia, of course, is doing really, really good closing out games. Anthony Nunez doing pretty well setting him up and perhaps on occasion getting a save opportunity or a ninth inning opportunity. Um, yeah, so that's kind of a lot to put on those younger, less experienced guys. But in general, like the bullpen is really the least of the concerns for this team. And it's really the looking at the bullpen really requires more detail and kind of breaking down individual pitchers that I'm not going to do right here and right now. So I know that this was a very, very zoomed out interview. I think that sort of the bottom line is that Oriole fans can feel a little bit of hope that they are still relevant and that we are still relevant in this fight for the playoffs. Um, we will talk about this a bit more when we get and approach the trade deadline. Um, but the Orioles have made a lot of them their moves already. So at the trade deadline, of course, there are no free agents available, right? So any improvements to the team have to come through trade, right? The Orioles have made, and Mike Elias has made a lot of the moves that are available to him. He spent and sacrificed a lot of prospects to get Shane Baz for this team from the Rays. Um, the organizational depth is not there in the way that it used to be. The Orioles do have prospects available, but if the Orioles trade prospects at this point with where they're at in the organization, you are really running risk and compromising especially you're really running risk of compromising the organizational depth and perhaps how this team will look 2 to 3 years down the road. So the this team can make some improvements around the edges. Jackson Holiday is back. That should help a bit. Dean Kramer is supposed to come back. And then the Orioles can do stuff at the trade deadline. The Orioles don't have the prospects to go get Scooble if the Tigers are out of it, which they probably will be. They don't have the depth to go get top end guys and difference makers. The most elite baseball players available at the free agent deadline. The Orioles probably don't have the prospects to go acquire guys like that in that tier. They can get bullpen guys, they can get guys that'll sort of help around the edges, but they don't have the ability at the deadline to go get guys that will make substantial and significant impacts to turn this team around. So I say that because yes, the Orioles do and Oriole fans do have a lot of hope, or they should have. Sorry, let me take that back. Let me be very careful. The Orioles can keep what Oriole fans can keep watching baseball for the time being. Let me start with that. The Oriole fans can keep watching baseball for the time being. The wins and losses at this stage do matter. We are not out of it yet, as I said at the beginning. So wins and losses do matter. Last year at this stage, Oriole fans, they could have decided not to watch anymore, right? Orioles weren't headed to the playoffs. Season was done. That's not the situation for the Orioles this year. So Oriole fans can keep watching. They don't have to give up. They can keep watching, enjoying baseball, pulling for the team, hoping that they make improvements. Elias is going to be limited in what he's able to do at the deadline to improve and bolster this team. So, what does that mean? What that means is you are looking at the guys in general that are going to be the guys that have to turn this team around. Um, Guys are just going to have to play better. There is no better explanation than that. Yes, there's stuff with analytics that the organization can be doing better and should be doing better. I don't know enough about what they are doing to be able to comment on that, but something with the analytics and how the Orioles organization is viewing analytics seems to be going wrong, right? There is stuff that probably, if we're looking at the training staff, stuff can be examined with that, with the injuries the Orioles have suffered, right, et cetera. But in general, right, staying healthy is another really big part of all of this and the Orioles turning this around and building on this homestand. Um, the Orioles really have to. It's reliant upon the guys that we are watching currently to just start playing better. That's really what it comes down to. Gunnar Henderson has to play better. Uh, all the pitchers that were scuffling at the beginning, Bassett, Boz, Bradish, all of them have to keep pitching and pitching well, right? Whoever turns out to be um, the four, the five, whoever, etc. Although Bassett, is the four technically. But yeah, so all these guys right now, you're looking at the team and the guys that are going to have to do this. There's nobody that Elias is going to really be able to bring in at the deadline that is going to be able to have a substantial, significant impact to take this from a below 500 team to a playoff team. That is not going to happen. It's not out there. So the Orioles really, really have to figure it out for themselves on the field. Um, the coaches, they all collectively have to sort of figure it out together and figure out how to turn this thing around. So, I think that you're looking at the team basically, right? This is it. Tyler O'Neill, um, I mean, it's been so long of him not hitting well. Um, but he is one of the guys that probably they are going to have to rely on to do better. Beavers is injured, of course, but yeah, all that to say, um, I think the Orioles, maybe last year were kind of like hoping to hang around 500 by the deadline or get to 500 by the deadline, and then Elias would make a big splash. And that ability for them is not there this year. They could be at 500 at the deadline. Elias could tinker a couple things, but then they would have to turn it on and play better the rest of the way. So all that to say, there is a lot riding on this group that we are looking at right now. Um, these are the guys that day in and day out, we're going to have to see improvements in order for them to turn this season around and build off the 7-3 homestand. And we will continue to examine and monitor if they're able to do that um, as we continue recording episodes on the show. So the Orioles head to Boston. One of the other things about this team is they've been really bad on the road this year. They have been 9-17. Fortunately for the Orioles, they are heading to Boston. Boston has been really bad at home this year. So, this kind of feels like the opposite of the unstoppable force and immovable object situation. So, yeah, so the Orioles go on the road to Boston, then head to Toronto before heading home to play the Mariners. So, hope you all enjoyed listening to this very zoomed out analysis of the Orioles season, where we're at so far, where things are going for this team. Um, Please, if you haven't done so already, please follow the show. Give us a 5-star rating, write us a review, even if it's a negative one. If you have a YouTube account, you can subscribe to us on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. Um, if you want, please comment any thoughts on our videos with any thoughts, disagreements, concerns, questions about any of the analysis that I've presented, or that any of our videos have presented. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at The Warehouse Pod. Thank you all so much for listening to this extended episode of the Warehouse Podcast. The Orioles are alive heading into June. Thank you so much. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse, and go O's.